Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 17, 2024. The deadline to pass a federal government funding extension or face a shutdown is Friday night, and several House Republicans are publicly voicing displeasure with how Speaker Mike Johnson has been putting together the bill. Pentagon, Homeland Security Department, FAA and FBI issue a joint statement that the increase in drone sightings on the East Coast does not pose a threat to national security or public safety, and are likely a combination of legally operated, registered and unregistered drones, plus piloted aircraft and natural phenomenon such as stars. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is moving to pass a bill that would give local authorities greater ability to track the drones. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Health Secretary, continues one-on-one meetings with senators. For now, Republican senators are likely to support him. Vice President Kamala Harris urges students to stay civically and politically engaged, even if they were disappointed by this year's election results, telling them we must stay in the fight, every one of us. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg announces a new rule about how airlines must treat passengers in wheelchairs. The NCAA president, Charlie Baker, testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the impact of legalized sports betting, and the United Nations Security Council meets on the situation in Syria under a new government. Story from the Washington Post: congressional leaders appeared to cinch a bipartisan deal Tuesday to stave off a fast-approaching government shutdown deadline, but House Republican infighting could still endanger any agreement and push federal agencies to the brink of shuttering this weekend. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, told reporters Tuesday that his office would unveil a stopgap funding bill called a Continuing Resolution, or CR, that extends federal funding until March 14th. Without new legislation, government agencies will shut down at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Saturday. The legislation will include a year-long extension of the major agriculture policy and anti-poverty law known as the Farm Bill, plus an additional $10 billion in aid for farmers and ranchers, and a host of smaller policy tweaks that made for tense negotiations over the past few days. The Washington Post article continues that Democrats hope to include a provision that would have the federal government cover the full cost of recovery and rebuilding operations for Baltimore's collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge, though it was not immediately clear by midday Tuesday whether that language would make it into the final bill. Those measures threatened to turn what was supposed to be a routine federal funding extension into a dreaded end-of-year Christmas tree, decorated with lawmakers' pet projects, and imperil Johnson's speakership. Reporting from the Washington Post, Speaker Johnson spoke at a news conference this morning with other House Republican leaders.
Let me talk briefly about the funding of the government. The CR is coming together. Bipartisan work is ongoing. We're almost there. We worked really hard to achieve consensus on a bill that responsibly funds the government into March of next year. It'll go to March 14, and that date was chosen because it coincides with the calendars of the House and Senate, and it makes sense for us to get the appropriations done. But our aim is to do it early in the year, not wait till March, and all the appropriators and the people on the committees of jurisdiction are already working to do that. We've been working around the clock to get the CR done. It was intended to be, and it was until recent days, a very simple, very clean CR, stopgap funding measure to get us into next year when we have unified government under the Republican Party. But a couple of intervening things have occurred. We had, as we say, as we describe them, acts of God. We had these massive hurricanes, as you know, in the late fall, Helene and Milton and other disasters. We have to make sure that the Americans that were devastated by these hurricanes get the relief they need. So we are adding to this a disaster relief package, and that's critically important. Also important is the devastation that is being faced by our farming community. The agriculture sector has really struggled. They've had effectively 3 lost years, and commodity prices are a bit of a mess, and you've got input costs that are skyrocketed because of Bidenomics. You put all those factors together, droughts and all the other conditions, and you have a lot of small family farms and ranches and people who supply the food for the country in dire straits right now. And so Congress recognizes that need, and so we've had to add a little bit to that as well. So what would have been a very skinny, very simple, clean CR has been added. These other pieces have been added to it, and a couple of things that are related to all that. But I'm not going to get into much more detail because it's almost done, but we do expect text today, And we are going to try, let me answer your question in advance. I believe in the 72-hour rule. I've said that to all the House Republicans this morning. I believe we ought to try to pass this on a rule to go through regular process. We're committed to all of that. We're going to take care of these obligations and get this done. And then we're going to go to work in unified government in the 119th Congress that begins in January.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, this morning at a news conference. It followed a closed-door meeting of House Republican members. Congressman Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, came out of that meeting to tell reporters he did not like the direction the government funding extension was taking.
Of course. I mean, it's just swamp's going to swamp, right? 1,400 pages, still haven't seen the text. Multiple subject matters, important health care legislation in the context of extenders piled on the back of a 3-month CR with about $110 billion unpaid for, $25 billion of health care policy, half of which is fake pay for, being sold that is paid for because they're gimmicks and shuffling around the decks. Things like E15, which we didn't even have a full debate on. This is not the way to do business, right? And so, we said we'd do something different. And since we've been given the majority again, we're adding $330 billion in literally totally unpaid for additional deficit spending just since November 5th in 45 days. I don't see how that's doing what we're supposed to be doing.
How much of the blame falls on the Speaker? And
I mean, right now we'll keep trying to move forward. The conference itself owns this, right? And the conference needs to decide whether we're actually serious about spending. And they talk about, well, we got to do mandatory spending reform and bend the curve. But we just voted on a $200 billion shift of dollars in Social Security that's going to shorten the time when Social Security expires or goes bankrupt. We're just fundamentally unserious about spending. And as long as you got a blank check, you can't shrink government. If you can't shrink government, you can't live free.
Do you plan on supporting the Speaker in January?
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters outside the early morning closed-door meeting of House Republicans. He mentioned a health care package that was going to be added to the government funding bill, the CR. Punchbowl News writes that the CR package will also contain a health care component. One provision would require PBMs to pass through 100% of rebates to health plans. That would mean patients would see lower drug costs. Other PBM-related provisions would boost transparency in pricing, reauthorization of the Opioid Fighting Support Act, Medicare telehealth flexibility extensions, and an extension of the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act would all be addressed. That was from Punchbowl News. House Democrats also held their usual Tuesday morning closed-door meeting, and after, some of the leaders held a news conference. Here's the Democratic Caucus Chair, Pete Aguilar of California, on the government funding bill.
I want to ask about government funding, and there's a deal that Speaker Johnson is trying to roll out. Is this something that you can see Democrats supporting on the floor?
Well, we'll see. With the Democratic caucus, the details matter. We're going to review the language on its merits. I haven't seen any details or any final language yet. We've been hoping that would be posted soon. But one of the things that we know very clearly is that House Democrats will be needed to pass government funding. That has been the case this Congress. It will continue to be the case even in the next Congress. House Republicans are going to need our votes, so we look forward to working with them to be partners in how we fund government. But this is a lesson for Speaker Johnson. I mean, work with us. Let's find solutions. Let's tune out the most extreme voices in your conference, and let's find that consensus that will be necessary to fund government. That's the only way that this can move forward, and we look forward to seeing the substance of the legislation before we vote on it.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat of California, the Democratic Caucus Chair, at a news conference this morning. More on the government funding bill, the continuing resolution, the CR, in just a moment. But first, some news about the House Democrats from AP. House Democrats on Tuesday picked 74-year-old Congressman Gerald Connolly to lead the party next year atop an influential congressional committee, pushing aside growing calls for generational change in leadership ahead of a second term for Donald Trump. In a closed-door meeting, the majority of the caucus voted for Connolly to be the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee over 35-year-old Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who campaigned on calls to pass the torch to younger leaders. Connolly has seniority on the committee, Having served on it for 16 years, the vote was 131 to 84. That was from Associated Press, which also has this line: Ocasio-Cortez's loss comes as several other younger Democrats won the ranking spots on committees, pushing out more senior members. Those include Angie Craig of Minnesota for Natural Resources and Jared Huffman of California for Agriculture. And now more on the government funding bill, the CR, the continuing resolution, views from the Senate, and Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, chair of the Appropriations Committee.
We have been working around the clock to wrap up the CR and the disaster relief bill. We should be done, but unfortunately we've been delayed by an 11th hour demand from the Speaker. We are very close to an agreement, so I look forward to resolving the final issues and getting back on track. We are heading into the holidays, and the nation really needs a bipartisan package that will prevent a needless shutdown, keep our government open, and get much needed support to areas across the country that are recovering from disaster. Communities hit by hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and a lot more have been waiting for a long time for this. It's been nearly a month since I held a bipartisan hearing on just how urgently people all across our country need disaster relief. They are counting on us to deliver the resources they need to get back on their feet, to rebuild essential infrastructure, and recover in the wake of disaster. They are watching and wondering whether Congress is going to help them. And we have to answer with a resounding yes by getting this package across the finish line, which is what I am focused on doing. We have to make some hard choices in Congress sometimes. This should not be one of them. Another easy choice ahead of us: funding the government and preventing a senseless and devastating shutdown.
Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, chaired the Appropriations Committee at a news conference today. Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the current minority whip, incoming majority leader, at his own news conference, also talked about government funding.
What sort of problems would you anticipate on your side in the next 48, 72 hours in terms of slowing up the CR or any to review the bill? Johnson has not even posted the bill yet.
Right.
I mean, do you expect some people to say, hey, we need to take some time to look at it, we need to take some time on the floor? Does that get us to Saturday?
Once it's posted, they've got their rules over there that they have to comply with, and so I'll leave that to them. But obviously, we want to see the posted text, and I think our members it's going to be hard to gauge the reaction of where senators are going to come down until we actually have seen the text. But, obviously, as I pointed out, this is a big pileup at the end of the year, largely, again, attributable to the lack of Democrat action on anything for the last 6 months. Not a single spending bill, National Defense Authorization Act. And so we're dealing with this mess because the Democrats here in the Senate failed to take up what I think are the most basic responsibilities of our government, and that's to fund the military and obviously to spend wisely the taxpayer dollars. So that's why we are where we are. What that looks like remains to be seen until we actually see bill text.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the current minority whip, incoming majority leader, meeting with reporters. This is Washington Today. Story from the Center Square news site. Federal officials said Tuesday that drones spotted along the East Coast over the past month do not pose a threat to national security or public safety. 4 federal agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of Defense, issued a statement Tuesday after weeks of reports about drone activity. In some cases, airports have been closed as a result of the drones. The Pentagon statement said that the majority of the more than 1 million drones registered with the FAA are used legally for commercial, recreational, or governmental purposes. Agencies noted that the recent sightings likely involve a combination of these legal activities and misidentifications of manned aircraft, helicopters, and even celestial objects such as stars. Statements of the agencies have not identified anything anomalous. That's reporting from the Center Square. Here is the Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder at today's news conference.
Can you unequivocally say that none of the drones that are being spotted are DoD assets or something that's being tested within the Defense Department? Are all of these either civilian or otherwise, but just not Department of Defense drones?
You're talking about the drones in New Jersey up and down the... Yes, they are not DoD assets.
None of them are?
To my knowledge, none of them are.
Okay. And are there any sort of experimental programs going on where maybe drones are being tested? That,
to my knowledge, no.
Okay. What about the ones that are flying over military bases at this point? Have there been any possibilities of collecting what sort of information these drones are doing or anything like that?
Yeah, again, just to kind of put this into context, and I know that our colleagues at the White House, FAA, DHS, FBI have all made this point. So over 1 million drones registered in the United States, and on any given day, approximately 8,500 drones are, in flight. And so the vast majority of these drones are going to probably be recreational or hobbyist. They're going to be commercial drones, used in things like architecture, engineering, farming, or they could be used for law enforcement. Is it possible that some of those drones could be up to malign activity? It's entirely possible, but the vast majority, that is not, the case. And in the case of drones flying near or over U.S. military installations, that in and of itself, just given the volume of drone flights we see on a given day, is not something that's new. We take all of those seriously. We will typically, when we detect them, attempt to classify them and take appropriate measures. Is it possible that some of those are surveilling? Absolutely. But can you make that assumption in every case? Not necessarily. So in each case, commanders have the authority, installation commanders and authorities have the authority to respond appropriately, and will continue to do that.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, an Air Force Major General, at today's Pentagon news conference. Biden administration officials gave members of the U.S. House Intelligence Committee a classified briefing on the drones issue, and Congressman Ami Bera, Democrat of California, came out to speak with reporters.
Yeah, I'm satisfied with the answer. I think the FBI, the intelligence community, is taking this very seriously, is looking at every report, and to date, there's no evidence that there's anything nefarious going on here. But again, I think they are taking it very seriously.
So is your assumption now after this briefing that, most of these are actually planes or?
I think, they're drones or other things, but I also know the proliferation of hobbyists and drones and, Amazon wanting to deliver packages. There's things that we have to do and obviously catch up with that proliferation. But again, looking at the drones and the sightings right now, to date, we were not given any evidence that there was anything nefarious.
What question do you still need answered?
There's nothing, I don't walk out of there, and I would certainly reassure the folks in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, throughout the country, that we take this pretty seriously, and we understand that, we're going to see more and more drones that are out there, right? So what do we have to do legislatively to catch up to that? How do we make sure the folks that make these drones, the radio frequencies and so forth, so we can easily identify, what drone this is, who's operating it? Those are all things that we as Congress have to catch up to. But again, I feel reassured now that the FBI, local law enforcement, everybody understands the public concern and is taking it very seriously. And I would say to the public, we were given no evidence to date that there is anything nefarious.
Should the government be more transparent with the public about what
I think it's important, because if we don't, which is why I'm talking to you guys, if we don't put that out there, other conspiracy theories, et cetera, are going to fill that space. So again, to date, we were given no evidence that there's anything nefarious.
Congressman Ami Bera, a Democrat from California, outside the House Intelligence Committee closed-door briefing on those drone sightings. Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican of Texas, Foreign Affairs Committee chair, was also at that site. He's not a member of the Intelligence Committee, but he spoke to reporters and said he had some thoughts on where the drones are coming from.
Yeah, we want answers. The response that I'm getting is that we don't know whose drones these are. I was with the NASA administrator, Bill Nelson. He said that these drones have been reported over military sites, military bases. I would not think those are friendly. I would think those are adversarial. In fact, NASA seems to be picking up more than our military is with respect to the drones. So I think Congress is gonna pursue this. I know the House Intelligence Committee is having a hearing on this. We need to identify who is behind these drones. My judgment, based on my experience, is that those that are over our military sites are adversarial and most likely are coming from the People's Republic of China.
Congressman Michael McCall, Republican of Texas Foreign Affairs Committee Chair, speaking to reporters. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said on the Senate floor today that he wants to take legislative action in response to the drone activity.
This afternoon, I will come to the Senate floor to stand with Senator Peters to pass legislation I've co-sponsored to respond to the recent reports of unusual drone activity. The FBI, DHS, and DOD, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Defense support this bill. Our legislation will explicitly authorize state and local authorities to conduct drone detection and help them better coordinate with federal law enforcement. With the multiplicity of drone sightings and so many drones in the area, many harmless for recreational use, but many that there are still many questions about, federal authorities agree that they can't respond to these incidents alone, and they need help from local authorities. But unfortunately, the local authorities do not have the authority right now. It's only in the domain of the federal government. For all we know, the recent drone incidents are for the most part, or maybe all part, benign. But even so, in some cases they can be disruptive, like when they impact airport operations or approach bases. And people are understandably anxious about seeing things in the night sky without clear answers to what is going on. The people in New York and New Jersey have a lot of questions, still haven't gotten answers from the feds. The worst part is that right now, local officials have very little in terms of resources and oversight authority to do anything about these incidents. So this afternoon, I will join Senator Peters to try and fix that, and I thank my friend from Michigan for his good work on this bill.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor today. The bill is titled Safeguarding the Homeland from the Threats Posed by Unmanned Aircraft Systems Act. And Ellen Gilmer, Homeland Security reporter with Bloomberg Government, posting on X, as Schumer pushes stalled counter-drone expansion bill to Senate floor, Chrissy Houlihan, that's a Democratic House member, is whipping votes for the House version, which Speaker Johnson co-sponsored last year, but with competing legislation in little time, it's a long shot. You're listening to Washington Today. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., President-elect Donald Trump's selection to be Health and Human Services Secretary, is back today meeting with more senators about his nomination. New York Times writes he's expected to meet with more than 20 senators this week, many receptive to his candidacy. Among the expected topics of discussion, his conflicting statements about the polio vaccine. A review of his public comments shows he has consistently expressed views about the vaccine that are at odds with the medical consensus. That was from the New York Times. Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, spoke to reporters after meeting with Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
How'd the meeting go?
It went good, very positive. He's upbeat. He is 9 months older than me, so he's got a lot more knowledge than I do. But we're basically the same age, and I remember his past and how he grew up, and it was fun to talk to him about his family. But at the end of the day, we talked about abortion, and the big thing about abortion is he's telling everybody, he said, listen, whatever President Trump, I'm going to back him 100%. And of course, President Trump is for the three exceptions. We've all heard that. We talked about our farmers in Alabama, which they're very concerned about food and food safety, but not go overboard where we can't have good crops. And I can understand that, and he's very on board. He understands our farmers are in trouble, and we want to make sure that we have farmers that can make a living and we don't lose our family farms.
What specific questions did you ask him about abortion? What concerns did you?
Well, I just asked him. I said, in the past you've been pro-abortion, and he said, well, it's basically he and President Trump had sat down and talked about it, and both of them came to an agreement. Hey, Roe Wade is gone back to the states. Let the people vote on it, and that's been mine all along. I'm pro-life. But I am glad that the American citizens have a chance to vote in their state, and he's the same way.
President Trump has said that he
does support it going back to the states, but this role is a federal role that he would be confirmed to. Did he indicate, or did you talk about what might happen with abortion drugs under his overview?
Yeah. No, we didn't talk about abortion drugs at all, so I can't elaborate on that. I'm sure somebody will ask him down the way.
On vaccines and some of the kind of, views that he has espoused with regard to school mandates and things like that, are you worried about potential changes that could cause outbreaks here in America?
Well, what I was excited to hear him about is get away from guessing and do facts, do science. Get behind the science and stay with it. Don't be guessing. And that's what a lot of these vaccines have done. They haven't been 100% proven. If you look at the number of vaccines these young babies get over a short period of time, it's dozens and dozens of them. And he's totally against that. He wants to make sure that parents understand the good and the bad and the ugly, instead of just forcing parents to give vaccines to their kids. But I talked about, he and I both grew up and we had 3 vaccines: tuberculosis, polio, and I think smallpox, and that's how much it's grown years. Now we get dozens and dozens.
Senator Tommy Tuberville, Republican from Alabama, meeting with reporters after his meeting with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who will be nominated for Health and Human Services Secretary by President Donald Trump after the president-elect is sworn in January. Washington Post article on the Kennedy nomination says that Kennedy can afford to lose the backing of only 3 Republican senators, assuming that no Democrats crossed the aisle to support the famous son of the liberal Kennedy clan. From ABC News, in some of her most fulsome remarks since the 2024 election, Vice President Kamala Harris delivered a message to those disappointed in the election outcome. Now is the time to stay in the fight and stay true to beliefs. The Tuesday speech marked the vice president's most extensive comments since her concession speech following her loss to President-elect Donald Trump in November. Harris thanked the audience of young leaders, which included high school and college students, recent graduates, and apprentices who have been active in their local communities, in her remarks at Prince George's Community College, and said they now are heirs to the fight to keep the light of America's promise burning bright. That was from ABC News. Here's the vice president in Maryland.
And as we then approach the end of this year, many people have come up to me telling me they feel tired, maybe even resigned. Folks who have said to me that they're not sure whether they have the strength, much less the desire, to stay in the fight. But let me be very clear. No one can walk away. No one can walk away. We must stay in the fight. Every one of us, including the fight for an economy that works, not just for those at the top, but for working people, for all Americans. The fight to make sure everyone has a fair shot to pursue their ambitions. The fight for our ideals, including the equality among us, the freedoms to which we are entitled, the dignity that we possess and is possessed by every one of us. So we must stay in the fight, because that is the responsibility, in my opinion, that comes with the privilege of being an American.
Vice President Kamala Harris at Prince George's Community College in Largo, Maryland. She also, in her speech, had a little fun at her own expense, referencing the coconut tree meme about her from the campaign.
And I ask you to remember the context in which you exist. Yeah, I did that.
Vice President Kamala Harris today in Maryland. It was back in 2023 where she infamously said, "None of us just live in a silo. Everything is in context." My mother used to say she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, "I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree. You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you." As for her future, a CNN article from Sunday has this paragraph: top aides and people close to Kamala Harris are divided over whether she should head home to run for California governor in 2026. It all comes down to whether they believe she could win the Democratic nomination for president in an expected competitive primary in 2028. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio is easy. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays, catch Washington Today. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also available on YouTube. Just search for Washington Today. Story from USA Today. The U.S. Department of Transportation announced that a new rule that aims to protect travelers who rely on mobility devices has been finalized. According to the department, the rule addresses many pain points for disabled travelers and has provisions including increased penalties for mishandled mobility devices, new training requirements for airline employees who work with disabled travelers, and improved standards for onboard assistive devices. That from USA Today. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg spoke about this at a news conference in Washington.
Based on DOT data collected in 2023 alone, there were 11,527 reported incidents of an airline mishandling wheelchairs and mobility scooters. Behind every one of those cases is someone left to deal with damage to a necessary, important device, one that allows them to move not just through the airport, but through their everyday lives. As those statistics and those stories reached us, they made clear that this department needed to do something, to use our authority better, to ensure that passengers can move safely and easily when flying, and that they're assured the dignity that they deserve when they travel. And that's what brings us to today, and to this occasion officially, on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, to announce the new final rule on safe and accessible air travel for all American passengers. This rule sets out comprehensive standards for prompt, safe, and dignified assistance to passengers with disabilities, especially for those who use wheelchairs. And I want to offer special recognition to the team that made sure that we got this rule done before our term here was finished, because the work you've done on this is truly a life changer. There are a number of guidelines that are spelled out in the rule. I want to touch on just a few right now. For one, airline employees and contractors will now undergo annual training to make sure that they are prepared to safely assist passengers who have mobility disabilities and that they can carefully handle passengers' wheelchairs or scooters during a flight. Airlines will be required to provide prompt assistance for passengers with disabilities, like having a wheelchair available near the door when getting off the plane. The rule makes it clear to airlines that all checked wheelchairs and other mobility devices must be returned to a passenger in the same condition as received, and that any damage sustained or delay in returning that equipment will be presumptively considered a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act, which is a move that makes it much easier for our department to hold airlines accountable. In the event that a wheelchair is damaged, the final rules offer passengers the choice of allowing the airline to promptly repair or replace the device and pay the associated cost, or allow the passenger to arrange for their preferred vendor to repair or replace their device, with the airline bearing the responsibility to transport the device and pay the vendor directly.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg at today's news conference in Washington. He was joined by Senator Tammy Duckworth, Democrat from Illinois, who does use a mobility device. And returning to the USA Today article on this new rule, according to the Transportation Department statistics, airlines damage or destroy 10,000 to 15,000 mobility devices every year, a rate of about 1.4% in 2023. The Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing today on the growth in sports betting since the Supreme Court ruling in 2018 made it legal. Witnesses included the NCAA president, Charlie Baker. An article in Sports Bureau Journal about the hearing reads, when Baker first took on the job, one of the first things he and the NCAA did was conduct a survey of 18 to 22-year-olds in college, which found that over half of them bet on college sports. It's a priority to tackle the issue, Baker said, with a specific focus to get prop betting out of sports. That was from the Sports Business Journal. And that prop betting was the focus of a question from the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair, Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois.
So we live at a time where a prospect, basketball, football prospect in high school could be lured with tens of thousands of dollars to a college to play a sport, perfectly legal. And that young man, in this example that I'm using here, may come from a family that has had no experience with any money at all in their lives, very modest family, just happened to have a star athlete in their household. He goes to the school, starts off on the basketball team, and at some point becomes quite a player of repute. Reaches out to many others to encourage them to follow him in sports. Comes a day when his college roommate says, I need to talk to you before the next game. Between you and me, I'm going to ask you to do one thing, just one. I promise I'll never ask again. Miss the first 2 foul shots, and I'll never bother you again. And he says, that's it? Just miss the first 2. You may do that already, but I need you to do that for me. He goes out in the game and is tempted by the possibility of doing that, thinking it's a rather harmless request, not knowing what's behind it all, and we can all guess what might be behind it all. At risk is not only that athlete and his future, if that's ever discovered, but the integrity of sports itself. Going back to 105 years ago in the Black Sox scandal, gambling and sports have been a lethal combination. Pete Rose is further evidence of that. So we're in a situation where college sports are now reaching a level of massive investments for NIL and other incentives to bring students to school or to put them in portals, move them to another school, and betting is on top of it. As a head of the NCAA, representing schools all across America, how do you view this phenomena?
Well, I certainly share your concern about what, in essence, is an example that involves a prop bet. And one of the reasons why we've been working hard to get all states to prohibit prop bets on college sports is, for example, for exactly the reason you just raised. I've actually talked to student athletes who have told me 100 versions of exactly the same story you just told me, which is the pressure that they feel, social pressure and other pressure from classmates, schoolmates, people they know, friends, people around the sports community, to do certain things that aren't going to affect the outcome of the game, but will absolutely help, quote unquote, somebody make their number. And that's part of the reason why for us, this prop betting issue in particular is so fundamental. I mean, the example that you used about Armando Bacot having what he thought was a pretty good game in the tournament in which UNC actually won and getting more than 100 messages directed at him because he didn't get, quote unquote, enough rebounds. Those stories are everywhere. And I think one of the most fundamental opportunities that we have to take at least some of the pressure off a lot of these young people is to get prop bets out of the system. It's an enormous problem for them, and it creates an incredible amount of harassment, social pressure, and abuse, period.
NCAA President Charlie Baker questioned by the Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois. While the announced subject of this hearing by the chair was sports gambling, some Republican senators did take the opportunity to raise another issue with the NCAA president, that is transgender athletes. We covered this hearing, and you can find the video in its entirety at our website, cspan.org. Wall Street today, the Dow down 267, a 9-day losing streak for the Dow. That's the worst since 1978. NASDAQ down 64, S&P down 23. Story from the Hill. The House Task Force on Artificial Intelligence released its sweeping end-of-year report Tuesday, laying out a roadmap for Congress as it crafts policy surrounding the advancing technology. 253-page report takes a deep dive into how the U.S. can harness AI in social, economic, and health settings while acknowledging how the technology can be harmful or misused in some cases. That was from the Hill. Turning to foreign affairs, from Associated Press, a senior Russian general was killed Tuesday by a bomb hidden in a scooter outside his apartment building in Moscow, a day after Ukraine's security service leveled criminal charges against him. Ukrainian officials said the service carried out the attack. This came up today at the State Department briefing in Washington with spokesperson Matthew Miller.
The killing, the appears to be an assassination of the chemical weapons chief, General Krylov. Want to see if, first of all, the Kremlin is saying that Ukrainian allies are to blame for this. Do you have a response specifically to that, or more broadly to his killing?
I don't have any assessment on that explosion. I can tell you that the United States was not aware of it in advance and was not involved.
And do you have any view on his killing, and was he a legitimate target, regardless of whether the U.S. was involved?
I don't have an assessment. It's not something that we were involved in. Obviously, he was a general who was involved in a number of atrocities. He was involved in the use of chemical weapons against Ukrainian military. It's something the United States has publicly assessed before, that the Russian military under his in a unit under his command has used riot agents in violation of international law on the battlefield. But with respect to this individual incident, I don't have any comment.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference at the State Department in Washington. From Reuters, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, now a senior Russian security official, told a meeting shown on state TV that Moscow would avenge what he called an act of terrorism. Medvedev said law enforcement agencies must find the killers in Russia. Everything must be done to destroy the masterminds of the killing who are in Kyiv. We know who these masterminds are. They are the military and political leadership of Ukraine. That was from Reuters. From the New York Times, the leader of the rebel coalition that swept to power in Syria over a week ago said that all armed groups in the country would be dissolved. Syrian state news media reported Tuesday as the new government tries to rebuild a functioning state. Just over a week after President Bashar al-Assad's fall, the new authorities in the Syrian capital, Damascus, have sought to project stability after almost 14 years of civil war. Article from the New York Times. The United Nations Security Council held a meeting today about Syria. UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher told the ambassadors, at this moment of both hope and peril, we must rise to the challenge and support the people of Syria. The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said the U.S. is ready to help.
Colleagues, at long last, the Assad regime has fallen, and the Syrian people are seeing their first glimpse of freedom in decades and are experiencing their first glimmer of hope. That includes thousands of political prisoners who have spent years and years locked away by the regime. Syrians like Qasim Sobi El-Kabalani, who shared his story with the BBC last week. Qasim was arrested by the regime in 2016 and eventually sent to Saadnaya, to the prison which has been described as a human slaughterhouse. There he was subject to unthinkable horrors, including torture. And after so much abuse, it was nearly impossible for him to imagine his release. But now Qasim is free and feels like he has been granted a new lease on life. Colleagues, all of Syria has a chance for a new beginning. This is a historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better life. After more than a decade of conflict and corruption, their needs are extensive, and the United States is committed to mobilizing global support. Last week, Secretary Blinken, together with our partners in the Aqaba Joint Contact Group, announced a set of principles that will help guide international efforts to support the Syrian people as they write their next chapter. And let me be clear, it is theirs to write. It would be a waste of this historic opportunity if one tyrant were toppled only to see a new one rise up in his place. Therefore, we fully support a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition in which the spirit of Resolution 2254 that will lead to credible, inclusive, and non-sectarian governance for the benefit of all Syrians, as we heard stated by Mr. Pedersen earlier today.
U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield at today's Security Council meeting at the UN in New York City. Russia had supported now overthrown Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, including militarily. Today, the Russian ambassador to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, did not mention the name Bashar al-Assad during his remarks. You will hear part of his comments through an interpreter.
We follow very closely the developing situation in the brotherly country of Syria, which has entered a new transitional period of its history after the major part of its territory came under the control of the alliance of armed groups. It is clear that predicting today the outcome and the political, socioeconomic ramifications of developments in this country, of the major tectonic shifts there, is not something anyone can do. We are all hoping for the best. But I would like to underscore that the Russian Federation has always been on the side of the brotherly people of Syria. We have always extended and we will continue providing them with the needed support. It is the Syrian people, in all of its ethnic and religious diversity, has to decide the future of Syria, which currently is quite uncertain given the internal lack of stability, which is fraught with palpable threats to its sovereignty and statehood. The territorial integrity of this country is more vulnerable now than ever. There's a real risk of its becoming a number of cantons broken down by ethnic and religious characteristics. The Syrians today have made the utmost efforts to make sure there is an inclusive national dialogue without separating people into losers and winners. This is a very serious and difficult task, and the international community has to do utmost to help this along.
Through an interpreter, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, at today's UN Security Council meeting in New York City. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, writes New York Times, on Tuesday met with military officers in territory Israel recently took control of in Syria, according to Israeli officials, in a trip that offered a further sign that Israel could solidify its hold on the newly seized ground. And finally, on Washington today, an update on the health of U.S. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, who fell while on an official trip to Europe last weekend for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. Today, Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican of Texas, who was on that trip, spoke to reporters in Washington.
Can we ask you one quick question
Sure.
on Speaker Emerita Pelosi and the fall that she had?
Yeah.
Just, your thoughts to her, what have you experienced there, how's she doing if you're aware?
She's doing well. She had a hip replacement. I was right next to her. She likes to wear high heels, very high. She was on one of her last steps on this marble staircase that didn't have a railing, and she lost her footing and fell to the ground. I immediately helped pick her up, and we took a picture. After that, you could see me holding her up by her hand, and then very soon thereafter, her vehicle showed up, and she was taken to the hospital. I wish her a speedy recovery. She was transported from Luxembourg to Ramstein, and specifically the Longstuhl Hospital, where I believe she currently is, having a hip replacement. She's 84, but when I talked to her on the phone, she had a lot of energy, very spunky. She wants to get out of there. She wants to be able to fly back home to the United States. Overall, she's in good spirits, and there's no more health danger to her other than hip replacement.
Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican from Texas, meeting with reporters on Capitol Hill. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can see all of C-SPAN's programs on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. And it's on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, sign up for our daily email word for word at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.